If you want to become an effective leader at work, there are 4 critical communication skills that you need to nail. The problem is most leadership advice out there completely ignores these skills. Instead, they talk about really generic things like have empathy or set expectation. Now, these are really good starts, and they have been repeated so many times that they just don't really mean anything anymore. And that's why in this video, I'm going to spare you all of those generic tips. And instead, I'm going to give you 4 very specific steps you can take to improve your communication skills and become a top 1% leader in your workplace. And once you've got these skills down, you're going to win the hearts of your team. You're going to be able to motivate them, mentor them, and then you're going to start seeing productivity and results rise. So in other words, you're going to set yourself up to be a successful leader of whatever teams or initiatives that you're in charge of. So let's get into it. First, evolve past active listening. The first skill is going to surprise you a bit because I want you to ditch the idea of active listening. And you've probably heard the opposite advice. Be an active listener, nod your head while people are talking, repeat their main points back to them so they know you're listening. But this is not enough. It might work well for building like personal social relationships, and maybe talking to your shrink, but it's not going to help you become an elite communicator in the workplace. People need to get things done at work. Active listening only gets you so far because when you use it, you're just communicating, oh, I understand what you're saying. Again, that's great for a relationship, but not great for driving productivity and results in a larger organization. Instead, you need to evolve past active listening to adaptive listening. Now, what's the difference? Adaptive listening is all about listening, but it's in the way you listen that helps the speaker get what they need. So instead of merely acknowledging, like, yeah, I'm listening to you, you're actually engaging in dialogue with them. We believe listening includes the way you respond. Maybe you're challenging the idea. Maybe you're giving them really honest feedback. Maybe you're working with them to achieve the best possible course of action. This actually is listening, and it requires a very different skill set and a different model than active listening does. You have to develop listening skills to ask yourself, what is this person? What do they need from me in this interaction? Now, not many people think about the goals of the other person when they're in an interaction. So this by itself, it takes a lot of practice. But I promise you, if you start using adaptive listening, you will have more influence with your team and your leaders, and you're going to start to see results. Now, we wrote an entire book on this concept of adaptive listening, and you can get a deep dive into how to learn it. So I put the link in the description so you have it. But in general, the model you need to remember is the acronym SAID, S-A-I-D. We have developed this model based on the 4 most common needs a speaker might have and how you can engage in adapting your listening to work with them so you come up with the best solution. So the S stands for support. This is when you're listening to comfort them or validate them or just celebrate how they feel. This style is used when the speaker's goal is just to be heard. I just want to be heard and understood or emotionally supported. And whether the person that you're talking to maybe had a bad day, maybe they're celebrating a big win, you want to provide them support by acknowledging and mirroring that speaker's feelings. And if they say, well, I'm having a horrible day, or I have the best news, that's your cue that this person is seeking your support. In this case, your job is to respond with words and actions that are going to validate the speaker's emotions. So whether that's to commiserate with them or celebrate with them, your job is to either be the confidant or the cheerleader, depending on the context of the situation. So the A in the SAID model stands for advance, and this is when you're listening in order to help them move things forward. This style is used when the speaker needs assistance in solving a problem or making progress or easing their load. If they said something like, I don't think I'm going to be able to have time to finish this, or I don't know how I'm going to keep this project moving, that's your cue. You might take on some of that work yourself by saying, well, I can take some of this off of your plate, or maybe you even choose to delegate tasks to help the speaker get over the finish line. The I in SAID stands for immerse. This is when you listen fully. You just are absorbed in the information. You're not adding input or judgment. This is most similar to active listening. You're going to use this when the speaker's message is meant to inform or simply to entertain. And your job as the listener is just soak it in and immerse in it and remember the information they're sharing. So if the person is speaking and says something like, hey, I'm here to give an update today, or just sit back and enjoy this, that's your cue. So finally, the D stands for discern. And this is when you're listening to critically evaluate something or question something or provide feedback. And this is used when the speaker is seeking some analysis or a critique or maybe just an honest assessment of what you think about what they've just shared. So you have to identify with what's working and how to solve that problem. So when you hear things like, I need some feedback on this, or does this make sense? That's your cue. Your job then is to help them see strengths or weaknesses in what they've just said, or even in the plan they just presented. Every time someone talks to you at work, they have one of these goals, one of the S, A, I, or D. And usually they have more than one goal during a conversation. So you need to figure out, what do they need? How do I adapt my listening to what they need and help them reach a goal? Once you start doing this, you're going to see almost immediate improvements. You're going to minimize misunderstandings, missed deadlines, and mistrust, all because you decided that you could do better than just active listening because you knew to do adaptive listening. Great job there. Second, being a business storyteller. Can you remember the last presentation you sat through? I'm gonna be super honest. I have sat through some boring stuff, and it's not because the presenter spoke in a monotone voice. They were quite lively, and it wasn't even that the slides looked unprofessional. It was obvious they had put a ton of work into them. I even felt like they were making some really super valid points. However, I can barely recall what they were saying because in the end, nothing really stuck with me. Now, how about this? Do you remember the last show you watched on Netflix? You probably remember all the issues each character was dealing with, how they overcame them, and you might even remember the overall message of the film. So even if you don't remember every single detail of the film, you probably remember 99% more from that show than the last presentation you sat through. Now you might say, well, that's because Netflix is more entertaining and you can't possibly turn your presentation into a movie. Or maybe you're thinking that because stories are so great, maybe I'll just tell you one at the beginning and then everything will be great because that'll be my hook for my audience. But unfortunately, it is not that simple. If you really want your audience to care about your idea as much as a moviegoer cares about the protagonist in a film, you'll need to present it as a story throughout your entire presentation. Think back to the last presentation that had a really big impact on you. I guarantee you're going to find that the presenter was also expressing their idea through stories. Check out Simon Sinek's Start With Why TED Talk, which is one of the greatest uses of storytelling in a presentation.
Why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet, they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here.
Instead of simply explaining his concept of starting with why, he tells memorable stories about times this idea worked so well that it changed the world. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you have to find stories like Apple, Martin Luther King, or the Wright brothers to support your idea, but what I do want you to do is to use the story structure in the entire presentation. And there's a million ways you can do that, and I have a ton of videos going over different strategies for storytelling. However, today I want to give you two very precise examples that you can use. One is by using the classic hero's journey story structure. You tell a story where the hero, either the customer, your team, or maybe an investor, they set out on a journey. And depending on your audience, this journey can be anything from building a Fortune 2000 company down to something simple like having a meaningful career. It all depends on who you're talking to. And too many people make the mistake of making themselves the hero of the presentation, or they make their company the hero. But if you want your audience to be completely hooked to what you're telling them, the hero has to be them. Now, you, on the other hand, you're simply the hero's mentor. Your job is to understand their goals so you can help them reach what they want to do. You need to understand their challenges so that you can help them overcome them. Now, like all heroes, your audience is going to encounter obstacles on their journey of adopting your idea. And these obstacles, like maybe it's business competitors or marketing issues or lack of teamwork or workflow problems or communication problems. Really, it can be anything that's getting in the way of your hero's journey. That is the villain of your story. You can tell a story of how a villain is always plotting for the hero's demise, how the villain anticipates your every move, or how the villain and his sidekicks are hell-bent on stopping you from reaching your goal. And the climax of this journey is when the hero fights the villain. For most people, this is the part of the journey where they are right now. They're in the fight for their lives, struggling against an enemy. Now remember when I said that you're the hero's mentor. And that's the whole point of your presentation, to mentor the hero on how he can overcome all these obstacles in their way. When you present your ideas this way, not only does it become so much more engaging than just rattling out what's in your head, but your audience feels compelled to take action. After all, what hero wouldn't want to find the best way to defeat the villain? Another way you can combine business with storytelling is by building an enormous gap between what is and what could be in the future. This is the third act structure, and it is something that innovators like Steve Jobs used all the time. So if you've seen his iconic 2007 iPhone launch, that presentation is one of the best examples of the three-act structure in action. During Act 1, Steve shows the audience what all the best phones were like at the time. You might remember the Palm Trios or the BlackBerry Curves, and those phones with physical keyboards that made it clicking sounds from way back in the day. You have no idea the words I just said. Probably all are younger than 2007, but anyway, he showed you all these different devices, and one played music. Those were called MP3 players. They were sending text messages. You could browse the internet on another. And then Steve went on to reveal the iPhone, which was actually a revolutionary new device. And it had all three of these built into one phone. And in that same way, in your Act 1, you should compare what people have today with what they could have in the future. And you bring light to the problem that people have today. And you show them how, with your idea adopted, they could achieve a future without these problems. So Act 2 is the middle. And this is where you make the gap between now and the future as wide as possible. And Steve does this by constantly going back and forth from the phones of today, comparing them with the iPhone. Here's the phones today, and here's the new iPhone. And this tactic makes what people have that are now, they look so dull and obsolete and boring. And it makes people eager to be like, oh my God, this is the future that you're promising, and I'm going to miss that. So once this gap is super wide, that's the perfect time to jump into Act 3. And that's when you give people clear instructions on how they could reach this future. You don't want people to be confused about what the next step is, because no matter what, no matter how eager people are for that future, they will eventually forget about your idea if you don't give them a really clear next step. So tell them exactly what to do. Again, I do have a bunch of other blogs and videos that dive deeper into how to tell better stories and different storytelling structures, so you could go and look for that. But for now, the key thing you need to do is start doing this. Take the time to understand your audience and their goals. Figure out how exactly your product or idea is going to help them achieve those goals, and then communicate how your product or idea is going to help them through an engaging story. And do these, and your audience will be emotionally invested in your story, and getting them to act is going to be way, way easier. 3, learn how to tell stories with data. This next communication skill is easily one of the most important skills you could learn to influence people at work. Whether you're a salesperson or a team leader, this technique is going to help you close deals and get buy-in. Now, I'm talking about telling stories with data. What would you think if I told you that 15% of the families in your area went without dinner at least 3 times every week? Now, you might feel a bit sad, but you might forget. You might forget that statistic within even an hour or two. You get busy and you forget it. But what if instead I said, the Johnsons are a family of 5. Jane, the mother, she's working 2 jobs and she has to take care of 3 kids. And she has a husband, John, who has a debilitating disease, so he can't work. And the Johnsons go without dinner 3 nights a week, even though Jane is working 2 jobs. And then what if I told you there's thousands of families just like that in this area that go without dinner 3 nights a week? This no doubt is more gripping to you more than just saying 15% of the families are going hungry 3 nights a week. That's because it took a number, which is an abstract concept, and made it specific. Not only specific, but something you could relate to. This is a technique we teach at Duarte. So basically, telling the story behind your data rather than just presenting the data. Nobody will be moved if you dump statistics and graphs on them. But data has great influence when you use a story to give your audience specific context that shows how it relates to their lives. So how exactly do you do this? Well, there's so many ways. And I wrote an entire book on how to tell stories with data. And I left a link to Data's story in the description. But for this video, I want to give you a few simple tactics that you can use today to start telling stories with data. One way is by digging deeper than just the numbers and taking a closer look at how people are actually affected by these numbers. The earlier quote I said was 15% of families go without dinner. That's a perfect example. That's so vague. It's such a vague number, and it's difficult to understand without diving deeper. So you dig into the data points, and what you see is how people are actually affected by these numbers in their life. It completely changes your perspective. Now, in your office or your presentation, instead of laying out the numbers for everyone, try comparing them to something that your audience is familiar with. Instead of just saying something like, "We achieved a 30% increase in efficiency," say something like, "This increase allows the company to serve 10 additional clients." Or maybe, "That increase in efficiency will allow employees to go home 30 minutes earlier." If you're saying that your car freshener lasts 5 times longer than the competitors, show people how much money they're going to save by getting your long-lasting freshener, or maybe even you can show them all the other car accessories they can afford because they made all those savings. Never blurt out data without showing what it looks like on the ground level, because the truth is, nobody really cares about the numbers themselves. They only care about how it affects them. Another way you can tell stories with data is by using emotional arcs. If you have positive data to report, instead of just showing a chart, showing how your company is growing over time, try kind of hiding the numbers at first and slowly reveal them over time. All the growth year over year builds suspense and excitement, and then show the final number, and that'll get applause every time. Use story structures like the hero's journey or a 3-act structure, but this time use numbers and figures to get your point across. These emotional arcs even work when you have bad numbers to present that are negative. If your numbers are going down and you need your team to take things up a notch, instead of just showing them that the company is losing sales and that you didn't meet your quotas or your KPIs, tell stories about the time when you as a team overcame the exact same obstacle and how these negative numbers are only temporary and you're the right person to lead them, and their own teamwork is going to pull them out of it, and they're going to have new ideas that turn your fortunes around. And the point of these emotional arcs is that you want your audience to feel something as you're presenting the data. The last thing you want is to show data to a room that is indifferent. Because remember, people are not robots or automatons that you can just feed data to. We are actually emotional beings. So use the numbers that you have as a tool to get your audience excited and stir up their emotions and inspire them to action. Now we're on the 4th and final skill you must have if you want to become drastically more effective at work. If you ignore this skill, you're going to run the risk of undoing all the progress that you have made so far by acquiring the previous 3 skills. Not even a great data story or understanding of your audience is going to save you from this one. I am talking about properly handling objections and resistance. Too many times, we only think about the great points we're going to make and all the great parts of our ideas. We replay all the amazing benefits of our idea in our head, and then we never consider why someone might disagree with us because we're in our own head. So when we're confronted with resistance, we're like, oh my God, I'm taken back. I don't even know how to respond sometimes, or worse, we become defensive, and that's not good. Maybe even you get argumentative, which is even worse. So we double down on our ideas because in our head, there's no way someone could just reject it outright unless they're stupid or crazy. But in reality, there is a big chance your audience knows more than you, especially when it comes to things concerning them. And the good news is that you don't have to be caught off guard like this. So how exactly do you prepare for resistance? Well, there's 3 types of resistance that you need to be ready for. And it's logical resistance, emotional resistance, or just practical resistance. Whenever you're presenting an idea, there's always going to be someone who sees things from a different perspective. This is logical resistance. And the way you can dismantle this is by diving deeper into different ways of thinking. Anticipate other perspectives. Don't just think in your head how people might object. Do research, dig up articles, blog posts, and reports. Challenge your own position. This kind of research not only prepares you for skeptical questions and comments, but it might actually give you better understanding of your own topic if you try to find the counter-argument in it. So much so, you might even adjust your views or have even a better idea overall. Emotional resistance comes out when something you say or do brings out a negative emotion in the audience. You might offend somebody. At that point, convincing them to adopt your idea is going to be pretty hard. Even if they can't come up with a logical reason to disagree, they've already emotionally reacted. So research your audience more deeply. Find out What do they hold fast as true? What bias or dogma or what moral code do they hold as true? And once you find this, you do everything to avoid violating that. Because the truth is, you can come up with a logically irrefutable plan and still get resistance just because you set people off by hitting a raw nerve. Finally, there's practical resistance. This is when it's actually physically difficult for your audience to act on your ideas. Simple examples of this might be, maybe you really need your colleagues to work overtime and they just can't, and now you're going to miss a deadline. Or maybe people ask you to part with their hard-earned money to support a cause. That's kind of hard for people to do. Now, your logical arguments should have already put your audience at the brink of taking action. One of the best ways to tip them over the line is by acknowledging the internal struggle that they might be having. By bringing this to light, your audience will feel seen and heard. Once you've thought through and researched the logical, emotional, and practical objections that people might have for your idea, you will not only be well equipped to deal with them, but you're going to have a much deeper understanding of your audience because remember, your audience determines whether your idea spreads or whether it dies. Handling resistance and disarming your audience was actually one of the points I made in my HBR Guide to Persuasive Presentations book that I wrote. But for quick takeaways that you can apply today, always be humble and acknowledge that there might be gaps that you haven't thought about. Acknowledge your audience's goals, their desires, their frustrations, their anxieties. Think through and research any potential resistance that your audience might have, and either adjust your ideas or prepare how to face this resistance should your audience bring it up. Whether you're at the top of the company or a new hire, being able to listen adaptively, tell business stories, breathe meaning into raw data, and preparing for resistance, it's going to go a long way in spreading your ideas. So next time you step into your office, or you give a presentation, or you work with your team to solve a problem, apply those 4 techniques, and you're going to find how effectively they can move things forward. Now, if you would like to learn more about how to create presentations that make an impact, we have a free tool that gives you 7 steps to make outstanding presentations. You can check that out in the link in the top right corner of the screen. Other than that, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.